Was
food and nutrition. Learners, Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Today we are those offering foods and nutrition. Today we are looking at foods and nutrition as our subject of interest today. And I welcome you and I encourage you to keep safe, stay safe, avoid crowds, so as at the end of the day we can survive this pandemic. My encouragement is that you always observe social distance and you endeavor to see that you don't crowd where it is not necessary. Now our topic of recap, under the topic we are going to recap or look at meat. Meat is a big area in foods and nutrition. It's too big, but now we are going to make a recap and see whether we can put it down to our own understanding. So meat is the flesh of an animal. It is the flesh of an animal. Can typically be a mammal, because normally human beings eat most mammals, or it can be a fowl or poultry. It is the flesh of an animal. Basically, it can be a mammal or it can be a fowl. Fowl are the birds. Basically what we normally distinguish as poultry. And that poultry, or the meat, though in some books poultry is put in a different class of beef or of meat, it may not be considered as beef, but at the end of the day it will be considered as a form of meat. But in true sense it is meat, and normally we shall take it in simple terms is the flesh of an animal, which can be coming typically from mammals and fowls or poultry. And like I've said, poultry or fowl, it can be put in its own kind of classification. What are the types of meat we normally have? The types of meats. I hope the words are clear. Normally we have beef. So most people think meat is beef. No, beef is part of meat, not meat being beef. So beef is part of basically meat. And we are saying beef is, normally we have beef. This normally comes from the older animals, the so-called cows. They are the ones which normally give us what we call the beef. Then under beef we also have what we call veal. Veal is still beef, but now this one is coming from the younger. The young calves. For us here, normally in the Ugandan setting or in the basic African setting, we don't normally get meat from the young ones, but the whites normally get the meat from the young ones, the calves, while for us here we normally concentrate on the older ones. So when it doesn't mature, normally people will ignore it and they may not basically extract or get meat from it. But in those other countries, they normally classify the meat, and that process of classifying meat, they are in position to know this is from a calf, this is from an older animal. and these ones are basically bred. They breed basically for beef, and they get that basic beef from them, or the basic meat from them, which can basically be used for that kind of purpose. So those animals which are not meant for beef and maybe are meant for dairy, they are the ones which normally give us this. So the calf from another animal which is meant for dairy, it is normally the one that gives us what we call the vein. I'm using big letters so as it is very clear at the end of the day. Then the other kind of meat, we have the lamb, we have the mutton. I'm putting them together. We have the hoggets. All this is under one kind of meat, but we shall see it is graded depending on what level it is got from the sheep. So this is normally meat from the sheep. It is meat from the sheep. So the lamb, the mutton, and the hogget are normally, it's a kind of meat that we normally get from the sheep, but it will have different names, and these names will depend on where it has been sourced from, at what level has it been sourced from the sheep itself. So we shall say the sheep in its first year, in the first year of the sheep, first year of the sheep, that is normally when we get what we call the lamb. Okay, excuse me. Okay, it's where we shall get the lamb. So when you get the sheep in the first year, we shall call it the lamb. That's why some people normally say it is the meat from the young of the sheep. It is the first year, when it is still young. I've told you that these are not so common in mostly in the African setting, or Uganda in particular. Why? Because for us we eat when it has fully matured, so we shall basically call it mutton. So in the first year, we shall call the meat from the sheep to be the lamb. So this is the lamb. Then in the second year of growth of the sheep, when the sheep is maturing in the second year, then we shall call it hogget. Hogget is the second year of the sheep. So in that process of maturation, we shall call it this, the hogget. Then in the last year, or the third year and beyond, that's when we call it mutton. Now this is when it has fully matured. So when it matures, that is basically when we call it mutton. So for us here, we are interested in the meat at this stage. At this stage of the mutton, that's when we get the sheep. That is at the stage when we are normally interested. So in most classification, we shall classify it as mutton, because in our own nature of setting, that is when we normally get it. That is the other type. So I'm going to clear. I'm trying to be slower so as we can follow. Then the other one is pork. So pork is also meat. Though some people normally don't think pork is meat, but pork is also meat. Like I said in the first place, normally people think meat is basically beef. Meat is a combination of all kinds of meats, all kinds of flesh we get from animals. So the pork is also a type of meat, and this is the meat we get from the pig. Meat got from the pig. So the pig is the main source of pork, and so when you access the pig, or when you get meat from, by the way, here it should be a domestic pig. Domestic, those are the ones which are reared. It can be at home or it can be at a commercial level. We have the wild pigs. Those normally we don't get meat from them. But those who eat wild meat, I think they normally go for that kind of meat from them. So the pork is a kind of meat, or it's a kind of meat that we normally get from the domestic pig. It has been sometimes it's normally processed in different forms. So one of the forms of processing, we get a product we call bacon. Bacon is also got from the pork, but now it's a type of meat that has been cured, or it's a type of pork that has been cured. It's a type of pork that has been salt cured, now this is a method, or it's a form of preserving the pork. So it is basically a type of pork that has been salt cured, and the purpose is to preserve it so as we can increase on the shelf life. It can stay for some days, though it is got around the belly area of the animal, around the belly area of that animal. So they cut around that place and then they process the bacon out of it. So it's a form of pork, but now in this case they have processed it so as it can have a longer shelf life compared to the actual beef from the animal just after slaughter. And it is less of fat because it is normally what they use for making sandwiches. It is basically the one they use for making other simple dishes, which are normally processed out of the meat from the pig. And then we normally have, we are going to look at basically those are some of the types of the meats that we normally have. If there is any other type, some of them can be embedded within the very types of meat that we already discussed here. Then we look at the structure and composition. The structure and composition of meat, sorry. Yeah, we're also seeing, I'm also sometimes confusing it. It is the structure of meat. Now this is the structure that will run through all the different types of meat. In the different types of meat, the structure and composition is almost the same from one type to another. So meat is basically composed of muscles that move the body in the animal. It is composed of muscles that move the body of the animal. So in other words, without the muscles are a component of the structure of the animal or the meat. And within these muscles, we basically have the muscle fibers, and each muscle fiber is composed of two basic proteins: myosin. So one of the proteins is myosin, and then actin. These are the basic proteins that compose each of the muscle fibers that comprise the meat. And so the enjoyment we get from the meat it is basically because of those fibers. If you enjoy meat and you're very keen, you've seen those fibers running through. You can even pull it with your hands, especially if the meat has been cooked well. So you can pull an individual fiber in the process. But now without those ones, the animal wouldn't even be in position to move. So all that has to be put into consideration. So those proteins, because the proteins form the structure of the body. Our body tissues is basically, in summary, proteins. So the body tissues and so the proteins are normally composed of these main ones, the myosin and then the actin. These are some of the main proteins that form the fibers. Then an individual muscle fiber is also composed of bundles, because it is one when it is actin and myosin, but they are different ones. You've seen them in meat. They are different ones and they are attached together, and basically that attachment is basically composed of what we call connective tissue. Connective tissue. Now this helps, in other words, the binding of these muscle fibers, which are composed of the myosin and actin. This connective tissue is also a form of protein, but it's normally that brings them together in the process. And so a whole muscle fiber is normally attached to the bones by basically what we call the tendons. So, and each tendon normally is composed of what we call, I hope I'm not so fast, and we are saying that each tendon is a collection of, one of the main components of the tendon is what we call the collagen and the connective tissue. So a tendon within the meat contains the main protein there is collagen. So collagen is part of the components of the tendon, which is also composed of the connective tissue. That's why I've not removed it from there. And they're saying that particularly they are normally used for doing some work, because we normally have the tendon and we also have in the ligaments, which is also part of that. For the ligament we have what we call the elastin. All these are forms of proteins in the different components of the meat. So in the ligament for it contains the elastin, the tendons contain the collagen. That correlationship is from the muscle fibers. Then breaking down the muscle fibers, we find that each muscle fiber is attached to a bone by what we call the tendon. In the tendon we have what we call the collagen, and within the collagen we also have another component between the bones, which we normally call the ligament, but within the ligament we have what we call the elastin. Now these are forms of proteins, and depending on where you open, you find that some are found in higher concentration in some parts of the animal, while some are found in lesser concentration within another part of the animal. So the collagen is mainly found in the collagen is mainly found in the tendons, and then the elastin is mainly found in the ligaments, basically that. Then the other part of the structure is basically what we call fats. All meat is composed of fat. Even in the leanest cut of beef, leanest comes from lean. Even in the leanest cut of beef, we always find that there is a part of fat there. Even when you say I want meat without fats, it is basically impossible. There has to be fat at the end of the day. So even in the leanest part of beef, we shall also find that there is what? There is fat. So fat is part of the structure of the animal. Where do we find fat in the meat? We normally find it underneath or under the skin. Under the skin. We can also find it around vital organs. Vital organs, like the heart. When you've seen the heart of those animals, like the heart of a cow, you've seen there is fat around there. If this is the heart, you find a layer of fat around the heart. If it's a kidney, those eat the kidneys, you'll find some layers of fat around it. Some are even around this place. So those parts, most of the animals, you shall find that part of their structure will have the fat either around the internal organs or vital organs or underneath the skin of the animal. Or it can also be found between bundles of fibers. Between the bundles of fibers. Bundles of fibers, and sometimes we shall call this invisible fat. Invisible fat. You may not basically see it, which is going to lead us to another term we call marbling. But now there are some of us who don't like fatty meats. So what do we normally have to do? Because we can't run away from the fat in the beef, or the fat in the mutton, or the fat in the meat in general. There are different ways we can handle this. One of the ways, we can roast the meat, what we call roasting, or some people call it smoking. You get that meat and then you smoke it. That process of cooking at home, like you're going to cook your beef, the wombo, that process of putting fire on the charcoal stove and putting some peelings of matoke or any other thing, or even without, and then you get the meat. We normally try to smoke the meat. Smoking may bring out different concepts. One, it can improve on the aroma. At the same time, it can help us to extract that fat within the bundles of the fibers. So that meat can, at the end of the day, be useful or healthier to eat. Why? You have endeavored to remove that extra fat which is there, which fat may become a problem at the end of the day. So the process of smoking, the process of roasting, the process of grilling, it is one way you can extract the fat, bringing out what we call healthier meat. The meat is now good for you to eat, especially if you're on a diet of low calories or if you're on a proteinous diet. There are some of us who have gone to proteinous diet. So if you're on that kind of diet, then you may find that sometimes you have to take those steps so as you can bring out a better product. So the fats, we can't run away from fat. So like I've said, even in the leanest means one with the little or smallest amount of fat, we shall also find that it will still have the fat. But we need that fat at some point within our bodies. You are aware of the fat-soluble vitamins. They always move hand in hand with foods which have what? Which have fat. So we cannot really run out. But you can reduce, or you can trim. You can trim the fat from the meat. Someone is on a low energy diet but is eating meat which is too fatty. So what do? You get the meat, trim off the fat altogether, remove the fat from the meat. As you remove the fat from the meat, you're making it healthier to eat it. And if you take an extra step of maybe of smoking it, grilling it, barbecuing it, or roasting it, you're good to go. The meat will be safe for you to eat. Now, still under fat in meat, I was saying that even in the leanest cut of beef, we always find there some fats. Now that leads us to a term we normally call marbling. Marbling this term. We are saying marbling is the white fat, or what we call, it is the white intramuscular fat in the meat. It is the white intramuscular. This is a U, intramuscular fats in meat. That white, if you get if you get a steak, that part of beef, when it's even lean, and you look at it critically with your eyes, even if you don't bring so close, you will see some white spots inside. Now those white spots are what we call, it's basically fat. It is basically fat. Those white specks you see there, the white ones, it is basically fat. Now that fat that is within even the lean beef links the process we call marbling. Marbling effects, and some books will call it marbling meat or marbled meat. Marbled meat or marbled meat. It's the meat especially from the red meat, which contains various amounts of intramuscular fat. So this kind of meat, or this kind of meat, is the meat that we find. It's the kind of meat that we find that even when it looks red, and you may think it is basically red meat, even that kind of meat we shall find that there is fat. So those who are on that kind of diet, you can opt for that to reduce on how much you can have. So we can continue. Now there are different books. Normally books give us different structures. Basically we shall look at the structure later. Now we have what we call nutritive value. Nutritive value of meat. But as you hear the word nutritive value, under nutritive value, we are going to basically look at the nutrients. The nutrients within meat. These animals we almost have, most of these animals have almost the same components in terms of nutrients, but we shall find that they differ as we go on looking at their specific composition. They may have vitamins, but you may find that the type of vitamins found in one animal may not be the type of vitamins found in the other. Or the or the meat found in that animal, it may have a protein in that kind of meat, but the protein found in beef may not be the protein found in poultry, or may not be the protein found in fish or any other kind of food, or any other kind of meat. So the nutritive value here, we are basically looking at the nutrients within that kind of food. And we shall say, one of the things we expect when you eat meat is basically what? Non-proteins. So we shall basically get proteins. And this protein is normally 18% of the beef. Implying that when you eat beef or when you eat meat, you are looking at a complex composition of different kind of nutrients, but a good percentage would normally give you what we call the proteins, which is normally 18%. And so here we have the likes of myosin, we talked about under there. We have the globulin, and under this, that's where we have the elastin and the collagen. So those are basically found. Those are the main proteins normally found. So you may find that one animal may have more of collagen, or may have more of myosin, and so on, depending on where that animal is found, or depending on the stage of growth and development of that specific animal. So whenever I eat meat, one of the things I'm expected to get. So taking you back to the other point we talked about and the diet. When someone is trying to manage a diet, you've heard people saying, I'm on a proteinous diet. So when you're on a proteinous diet, we expect you to eat more of the proteins, for reasons you may know, depending on how you're managing your diet. So a proteinous diet may have more of meats, or more of proteinous foods. Proteinous diet may not necessarily mean you eating animal meat or animal proteins. You may eat a combination of animal and then vegetable. When you're eating food, you may have more of beans than less of matoke and rice. That's a proteinous diet. Or you may have more of the beef, more of the meat when you're eating that kind of diet, if you're depending on animal, or if you're basically concentrating on animal proteins. Or you can have more of peas in your diet. Why? Because you're on a proteinous diet. That is basically that. Then we say it, the other component, other nutrients, we normally have the fats. This is a nutrient, you are all aware. And we are saying this is basically 30%, although this may vary. This is basically 3%, not 30%. It's basically 3%. But this may vary from one animal to another. The amount of fat found in pork is greater than the amount of fat found in beef. The amount of fat found in fowls or poultry is different from that found in the mutton and so on. Or it may also depend on the part or the cut. Where have you got that cut, that steak or that kind of meat? Which part of the animal have you extracted that kind of what? That kind of cut. Some parts may have more of fatty tissue, while others have less. That will also determine the composition of that, the composition of the fat. So you have to put all that in consideration. While others may have little or no of the fats. So if you look at the liver, you look at the kidney, however much they are parts of the animal, they may not have fat, or they may have little fat completely. So when you're eating them, you are not eating them expecting to get too much of that. If there is a fat within these organs, it may interfere in their action or in their processes. So by nature it was designed that we have less or no, and even if we have it there, like I said, it is outside, not inside, because when it is inside, it's going to interfere with the physiological processes that those parts are supposed to perform. Then when we move to carbohydrates, most of these animals have less or no carbohydrates, though they may have some carbohydrate in form of glycogen. They may have under carbohydrates. So most of the animals have less carbohydrate within their body composition, but they may have carbohydrate in form of glycogen stored within the body. But now this glycogen may not last. So before the food reaches the table, or before the meat reaches your table, this glycogen might have been already taken away. There is a process we call Rigo Mortis. Rigo Mortis. Under Rigo Mortis, you've seen animals when they slaughter them, they struggle, they fight. Now that process of fighting they're using this glycogen which has been stored in the body. And so that storage, or that glycogen that has been stored, which is a form of carbohydrate, by the time you eat this animal, this energy or this carbohydrate in form of glycogen has already been wasted by this process. It's a muscular process which requires the tissues to work so hard. Nobody wants to die. We all want to go to God, but none of us wants to die. So that process, even these animals, they don't want to die. So in the process, they fight so hard. In that process of fighting, they're using all that energy in form of what we call Rigo Mortis. So, but in some countries, what they do, they avoid this process because this process normally makes the meat tough or harder. I'll use the simple word harder or very hard. So that process of making meat hard, it normally affects the quality of the meat. And when the quality of the meat is not good, then the price of the meat will also change. So what they do all sorts of ways that they make sure that this energy is not wasted. Why? It can be converted inside into lactic acid, which lactic acid can have different beneficial effects to the meat. So any person dealing with meat, especially in the slaughterhouse, they do their best to avoid this process. But here, because we don't have the mechanism, we don't have the machines, we don't have the processes and the conditions, we find that someone slaughters the animal and even leaves it to run, and then they chase after an animal without even the head. You've seen other people who deal with who work in slaughterhouses. Sometimes those animals take off, or someone ties it with a lot of energy, like 10 people on one kind of cow, and they're using too much energy. So in the process, we shall find that a lot of energy is going to be dissipated by this animal, which may affect the quality of the other ones, or of the outcome in form of beef, or in form of any other. Others are slaughtered, they chop off the head and they leave the animal to run, and it knocks something, then it will just go down in the process. So also, that's not good. Now in those other countries, they inject around the brain here, and basically, in simple terms, the purpose is to make this animal rest. So the whole process is going to be done when this animal is not conscious. This animal can't even fight. It can't, someone doing something to when you can't fight back. They're avoiding this process because this process affects the quality of the meat. So they slaughter, they remove everything when this animal has already been made unconscious. It can't do any other thing in the process. So it becomes a very easy process for them, unlike here where it is a bit harder. You need strong muscular men. You've seen those people who work in abattoirs, like here in Uganda. Very strong men. Why? They are there to fight with these animals. So that is basically done. But back to this point, still on this point, to avoid to bring tender meat to be tender, soft. I'll use the word soft, but it's not really soft as in the context of being soft. They try to go through good processes. In some countries, they even play music for these animals. As they are going to slaughter them, they play soft music. So as this animal may not even remember it's about to be killed, it will just think it's a normal process. So they play some kind of soft music, so as at the end of the day, this animal enjoys. So before they slaughter, there is no that tension, because when you get worried also, like we get worried, human beings, even these animals get worried when they see others being slaughtered or being killed. So they have to be they have to be very careful as they are conducting these kind of processes. So as these animals don't go into that state of fear, because when you're stressed, you're using more energy. And in that process, we shall find that during that process itself, it's a bit hard. So if you don't provide the suitable conditions, these animals may not give you the tender meats. So maybe tough vis-a-vis tender, tough vis-a-vis or versus tender. I'll use an example of Uganda. For us here, we don't have the mechanism of putting in mind that I'm going to get tender meats, or when I do this I'll have tender meats, or when I do this I'll have tough meats. Now these animals, as they are being handled, like I've just said in the last discussion, that if the meat is tough in some places or in some countries, it will affect the quality of the meat. Quality and the price. Tough meat may tend to be quite expensive, quite cheaper compared to the tender meat. So when you have tender meat, the price is normally higher. And here the price normally goes low. Why? Because of the next processes that person is supposed to undergo through. And there are some methods of cooking which may not really go for the tender meat, and they will basically go for which will not go for the tough meat, and they will basically go for the tender meat. Now also that is put into consideration as those people who process meat, because when the meat is tough, it will affect the quality. When the meat is tender, it also has an impact on the quality and so the price. So we shall consider this to be high quality meat, while this will be considered to be low quality meat. There are some parts of the animals which also give us tender meat, and there are those which normally give us tough meat. Now meat got from around the neck area of the animal is meant to be tough. Why? Because there is too much work. The movement of the neck is something that is done continuously. So by nature, the body develops tough muscles or tough tissues around this area to handle. Now even those parts which have to handle weight, like the limbs, the legs, all those normally have what we call tough meat. While the abdominal area here, we don't normally find meat which is tough. Why? Because there is little activity here. And you've seen people who basically say, I want meat from that part. They even specify the meat, the part when they're in the butcher. I want that meat, knowing well, meat from that area is normally soft or is normally tender. But also achieving this is a process, like I've said, which normally they have to undergo as they're trying to process this meat. So all that has to be put into consideration. I've told you in some countries they play for those animals music because they want. In some other places they give them specific feeds which are meant to give their meat, to bring meat which is tender at the end of the day. And in some other stages, even the breeding, as they are breeding these animals, they know what they intend to have at the end of the day. So even the breeding, the kind of breeds, there are breeds which are meant to give us tough meat, and there are breeds which are normally meant to give us tender meat. So if you look at these animals, the exotic cows, meat from those animals is very, very, very tender. Why? It's a breed. While these local ones of ours, most of them give us what we call the tough meat. That is why toughness to us is not normally an issue. And also, you have to find ways on how to make this meat, because nobody wants to eat tough meat. How to make it tender or tenderize the meat. How to tenderize or how to make it tender. So there are the processes you will undergo to tenderize this tough meat. At the end of the day, they make this meat to be tough. Why? To make it cheap. Why? Because the processes are further. So someone has to incur an extra cost to buy a meat tenderizer, to get a hammer or to pound the meat, to get specific enzymes to soften the meat, to marinate the meat so as it can have the flavor at the same time be tender. So the process is a bit longer. So that is why the price is quite low, but what you go through, it becomes expensive at the end of the day. Then we have water. Water normally comprises 75% of this beef. And the more the fat, the less the water. So those animals which have more fat, they have less. So the more the fat, the less the water. So Animals with greater amounts of fat, they may not really have this percentage if they have too much fatty tissue. But within the fat, there is also water embedded there, so it's a longer chain of other polymers found there. So water comprises. I don't have to say much about the water. But now this is an average, mostly for lean meats. But as the fat continues, then we shall find a reduction. Then next we have what we call the vitamins. The vitamins. So we have what we call the vitamins. So under vitamins, there are too many vitamins found in meat. Let me just summarize them here. We have the vitamin A, okay. We have vitamin A, and this vitamin A is basically found in the liver and the kidneys. Always give us a good supply. Other meats normally have what we call a negligible amount there. Then we have the vitamin B. Vitamin B, especially thiamine, which is B1, is a good supply in the likes of pork. But other meats have the vitamin B1. Then we have the vitamin B2, and this is normally the riboflavin, which is found in the liver, the heart, the kidney, and even other meats give us some good supply. Then we have the vitamin D. There is a good amount of vitamin D, especially in the dripping. Dripping is also a fatty component of meat. Then vitamin C, most of the animals don't have vitamin C, so there's no way you can eat meat from an animal and so when I eat it I'm going to have the vitamin C. Basically meat is a poor source of vitamin C, what we call the ascorbic acid. So eat other foods, fruits and vegetables will give you the vitamin C. Nowadays vitamin C is on demand. People are rushing for vitamin C all the time. That vitamin C, you cannot get it from meat. So don't go to meat thinking that you'll get the vitamin C. Then we have what we call the mineral elements or the mineral salts. Mineral salts. Now animals are a good source of minerals. Why? Because the structural makeup of the animal is almost in same line to our own makeup. We have the bones, we have the tissues. So those tissues may have the same components. So we have the likes of iron as being found in most of the meats. And this iron is always found like in the liver. When you eat the liver can provide you with plenty of iron. But in most of the red meats, because you're all aware that the red meat, as you hear the word hemoglobin, this heme word here is a word meaning iron. And it is this iron which is responsible for the red color in the meat. So when I eat meat, even before I reach the liver, I'm already getting iron from what I've eaten. So when I eat the meat which is red, however much when I cook it becomes brown. It's another process, but the iron still remains there. So the red color of meat is basically a contribution of iron. So this iron formally forms the hemoglobin. This heme word is basically a simple term meaning iron. So when I eat it, I'll have supplied my body with enough of the iron, which iron at the end of the day can be a source of mineral salt to my body. So when I eat the liver, now this is a storage area storage area for iron. If there is demand for iron within the tissues, the supplier is here, this liver here. He will supply to all those parts of the body that require the iron. So when I take it, then I'll have supplied my body with enough iron. You've seen people who are on where they normally say you don't have enough blood within your body. What they always tell you, can't eat the liver. Why? The iron in the liver is great enough that it can replenish what you're lacking within 1 or 2 days. And if you have a rich meal of iron, that meal of iron can normally enable you to have a good supply. So I would encourage all those who want to get iron in their bodies to go for the liver. It's actually even easier to cook. It doesn't cook for so long compared to the red meat itself. So you can supply your body with enough of that. Then the other nutrient is phosphorus. Phosphorus is one of the other nutrients that we normally require. Now they're saying there is a good supply of still in the iron and then the kidney, but even the general structure of the meat can provide you. Then we have the sulfur. The sulfur as one of the mineral elements is also found in some types of meat or some kinds of meat. But even these normal ones will give you some smaller quantities, which quantities you can further use when you want to have access to the iron. So that is how important. Then we have the next of the calcium, which normally calcium moves hand in hand with phosphorus. Now this one is found in the bones. Now when I eat the bone, when I eat meat and I accompany eating it with the bones, then I will have enough of the calcium. If I cook this meat and there is proper leaching and extraction of the nutrients from the meat itself or the bones themselves into the sauce or the stew or the liquid, then you'll have supplied yourself or your body with enough of calcium and some of these other important mineral salts within the body. I think that is the nutritive value. As we're trying to wind up, that is basically nutritive value. Though these words move hand in hand, there is what we call nutritive value. Nutritive value versus dietetic value. Now, under nutritive value, we are basically looking at the nutrients in that food. Nutrients. And that is basically what we have discussed. The nutrients found, we have looked at the protein, we have looked at the fats, we have looked at the water, we have looked at the mineral salts, we have looked at the vitamins. That is nutritive value. We are looking at those nutrients. While under dietetic value, we are basically looking at the diet. Of what value is that food in the diet? So whenever you're eating something, you have to find a benefit for that kind of food. You have a reason why you're eating that food within the day. Altogether. So as you're making choice, we always look at the nutritive value and we also look at the diet. Eating meat, why? Because maybe I need it to do for me some purposes in the body. That is dietetic value. Something related to the diet. Maybe it is interesting to eat the meat. Maybe I have an issue and someone has told me, you eat that meat and you get A, B, C, D. So I've included the meat in my diet. However much it's an expensive item on the menu, but I'm eating it for a reason. Someone says, you are sick, you need iron, go and eat the liver. There is a reason why I'm taking that food in my diet. Altogether. However much that food may be expensive, but because of given purpose, because of a given reason, I'm having it in my diet. Though, even when you're eating, the nutritive value, or when you're looking at the diet, you cannot completely ignore the nutritive value. Why? Someone said, let us eat meat, because within our courses, the protein is supposed to be part of it. But within the protein, I'll get other nutrients. Other nutrients will also be there. The minerals, the vitamins, and so on. Now, this is also nutritive, is also dietetic value. I've included that food in my diet basically to acquire these nutrients. But I've also added it there. Maybe it's part of, it is a reason, there is a reason why I've been told to eat more proteinous foods, or more of this kind of food compared to others. So, in a diet, we are looking at a variety of concepts, a variety of issues at a larger perspective. Why? We have included a food in our diet, maybe for a change. That is dietetic value. It's within a diet for another reason other than the nutritive reason. So basically, that is the, but we shall look at dietetic value later as we come to close of that specific topic. Then we look at choice of meat. Choice, purpose. As you're going to buy this meat, or as you're going to get this meat from maybe the butcher, do you have the butcher? Do you have, what reason do you have at the back of your mind if you're going to access it? Do you have a reason why you've gone there? Or if you've gone there, do you have other things that you put in consideration as you're trying to go for that kind of food? So, under choice of meat, we always look at different things, putting in mind different concepts at the same time. I'll give an example. Meat is normally considered to be a very expensive food, and it is always very wise to make choice when you're trying to buy it, putting in mind different considerations or different factors as you're trying to discuss or as you're trying to buy this kind of food. The way you buy meat from, the way you buy beans when you go to the market is not the same way you'll go and buy what? Buy beef. A kilogram of beef will cost you around 14,000, while a kilogram of beans may cost around 3,500. Now that difference is very what? That difference is very, very important. That difference is very, very, very important. So when you buy, you can see 3,000 is, this is 14,000. It is almost a good factor of multiplication. So you have to put that to buy this meat. Okay. So we are saying choice. Under choice, as you're buying, this is because I've told you it's something very expensive. One of the factors in at a larger scale is value for money. Value for money. This should be, it's a very important factor. When you're going to buy, there has to be value for money. Altogether, as you're buying meat, the concept of value for money is very, very important. You shouldn't be given a poor cut of beef. You should not be given a poor cut of beef, because a poor cut of beef may affect the price of the money that you pay, and the cut of beef that you get is very, very important. So when I'm buying, I have to put all that into consideration. Am I getting the right quality for the value that I've paid altogether? But at the same time, there are what we call cheaper cuts of meat. When you're buying, you know very well that if I'm buying offals, which is part of meat, the price of offals is quite different from the price of a steak of beef. Why? The nature of the part, the price is also different. That is value for money. So you have to put all that into consideration, that some parts are cheaper. When you're buying the hoofs, the ones we use for making in Uganda, Mlokoni, Ebigere, the price is also too low compared to the steak of beef vis-a-vis the size or the quantity. So that can also affect. So you have to put all that into consideration. Though you may find that these cheap cuts of beef are very interesting, are very appetizing, they're very nice. Though we don't eat them every day, but they're quite interesting. You go to a place and someone prepares offers, what we in Uganda we call lienda, and my goodness, you can't believe it. Very interesting, and you may not even want to eat the real beef. Why? They've been prepared well, they have become interesting, appetizing, and so nutritious. So that can also be a consideration for value for money. But under value for money, always make sure you don't buy, there shouldn't be too much fat, visible fat in the joints. Because no one wants to buy meat and then you go scrap off the fat and you throw it away. You might think you bought a kilogram when around 300 grams of the kilogram is fat. There is no value for money. So value for money means I've got what I expect. You have also seen people who go to the butcher and says, I want that specific part. He mentions the part altogether, knowing well that that part is very important. There is value for money. There is value for money. So value for money is something very important. You pay your 14,000. Knowing well the 14,000 shillings, knowing well that the part they have given is the part that you need. That is all what we call value for money. I hope we have understood that fact very well. Then next time we shall look at the appearance and the choice. Appearance, we shall begin with appearance. This appearance, we shall also see how important it is when you're buying the meat, because each kind of animal has the way it appears when you're buying it. The color for beef is not the color for mutton, it's not the color for the pork, it's not the color for the veal. The meat appears different, and those people who know how to look at meat, you cannot tell him I'm selling mutton or you're selling beef calling it mutton. No, that person will be in position. So at the end of the topic, we shall be in position to see the different colors, and you will never be cheated when you're buying the meat. So with that, I want to stop there, and we shall begin from there next time. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.